you do things at times, you are so hurt, and you do the same things on other people without realizing that you are the problem.
We have the bodies that we have. We're exactly as nature intended us to be. It's as simple as that. But how many of us feel comfortable in that? So where's the conversation around that sex is a language? Love is a language. Intimacy is a language.
Yeah.
What do each of those things look like in their own right? What do those words mean to you?
And we're in. Christian, I really appreciate for you taking the time and coming to Triangle Theory.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
I guess we'd like to start with your childhood. So you currently run men retreats. You're a counsellor for men. What was your childhood looking like, and why do you think it had an impact for you to become a counsellor and just deal with men's problems, I guess?
Yeah, sure. So my mum and I lived with my grandparents until I was about 9-10 years old. So my mum was quite a young mother. She got pregnant at 18, had me at 19. So we lived with my grandparents for 9 years until she could save up a deposit for a house, and then we moved out. So essentially I had two mothers, and my grandfather was very much like a father figure to me. My real father wasn't a nice guy. He was physically and mentally abusive towards my mum. I never saw any of that. She separated from him before I kind of knew him in that sense. So I was very much kept safe from all of those things. And then, it was just the three of us, really. Like I said, my grandparents, my mum and me. But mum was off working, trying to save money for us, and therefore pretty much raised quite a lot by my grandmother. So I had a very female-dominant family and influence. Then my stepdad came onto the scene when I was about 13 years old. Did see my real dad sporadically up until about the age of 8, then didn't see him again until the age of 12, and then I only really saw him a handful of times. So he wasn't really a fixed person in my life. A lot of memories of just like waiting on the doorstep for him, like for my birthday, and wanting him to be around, but not really understanding why he wasn't. And then things kind of changed when my stepdad was arriving. So he was more of a fixture, real Stephen King sense of humour, very, very dark, very, very funny. And he's a lighting cameraman, so he does lots of documentaries. Mum was in the media industry as well. And then my sisters came along in my mid-teens. That was my childhood, really.
Wow. No, it's amazing. It's like, it's interesting when you say like your grandparents were a part of your sort of upbringing. Because I found with my grandparents raising me as well, they instilled quite a lot of their like older values in that sense. Would you say sort of when you're thinking about role models and the men in your life, who stuck out to you sort of growing up? Did you have sort of male role models? Were there certain personalities that you were sort of, attaching to or taking a liking to around sort of growing up?
Yeah, for me, and not to do disservice to my grandfather or to my stepdad in any way, but honestly, my role model was my grandmother. Like, she was an absolute force of nature, the real matriarch of the family. She did a hell of a lot of charity work. German woman came over to England at the end of the war, couldn't have children of her own, so she adopted and fostered my mum and her 3 brothers, all from different families.
Wow.
Did a hell of a lot of work in the community, resettling German families into British society. Got a lot of flack for it, being a German woman at the end of the war. Lots of hatred, negative responses from community, but nothing held her back at all. Set up her own business, raised a family. She was essentially the role model and the person that I really identify with as having a big hand in raising me. So, having religious aspects as well, Catholic, going to church all the time. So these morals of do good, be good, help others. Those are like the core tenets of the family that I was raised in. But on the flip side of that, not really taught boundaries. And what I mean by that is to consider your own health and well-being. How do you look after yourself while still helping other people? So being a teenager in school, I came out to my friends as gay at the age of 12 years old. Was really badly bullied at school. I say badly bullied, some people might not think it was, but for me it was at the time. I felt quite isolated and alone for a couple of years. And thankfully it was never physical, it was all just verbal. But kind of being 12 years old, not really feeling comfortable in spaces with other men or boys, not really feeling like I belong in those spaces, always feeling more comfortable around girls. Again, female dominant family, not doing well in school because I was dyslexic as well. and not having teachers that were sympathetic to that. Only one teacher who was absolutely phenomenal, Mrs. Potter. She taught food tech, and she was like a real saving grace in that school. You know, she used to sit down and explain concepts to me and talk about the subject. She really gave me the time of day. And, you know, that's the only subject I got an A in, you know, food tech. And people probably think food, oh, well done, you got an A, whoop-de-doo. But for me, that was a real saving grace. You know, I'm a very practical individual, a real kinesthetic learner. But in school, like all the other grades, I just like didn't really do very well at all. So I got this idea of, you know, being bullied by peers for being gay, not really being received well from most of the faculty for my dyslexia, so not really feeling like I belonged anywhere, and then not really identifying with any kind of male role models because, you know, I didn't really identify with the queer community, didn't really feel like I fit in there. I'd go out in my mid-teens into like the village and stuff, and they wouldn't let me into clubs. They said, "Oh no, we don't let straight people in." It's like, "Oh no, I'm gay." It's like, "No, you're not. Fuck off." And it's like,
Oh, really?
okay, well, I'm not going to prove it to you. It's like, so not feeling that I fit in that community, not feeling like I fit in with straight community. So where do you belong?
Yeah.
And this idea of like male role models, I wasn't into sport. You know, I had pretty bad asthma as a kid, grew out of it in my mid-teens. But again, how do you identify like with the community? Where's the sense of belonging if you don't have those things? So again, not to do just service to my grandfather or my stepdad, but a lack of like male peers or role models that I could really connect to. And it wasn't until I was about 18 years old that I started making some different friends in the work that I was doing in bars and stuff, and then started making some actual really amazing male friendships and connections. And then that was quite a different turning point for just starting to feel comfortable with guys.
Thank you for sharing. That's it's awesome.
Yeah.
Hey guys, thank you so much for making it this far into the podcast. If you have any feedback, then please let us know, as we always want to make this podcast better. So hearing from you is always a pleasure. Please subscribe to all of our platforms, get involved at Triangle Theory. If you've got any comments or if you want to share any topics that you think that me and Conrad would like to talk about, then please get involved. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much. Sorry, you were going to...
Yeah, I was about to ask, so that transition from not having any role models, not having any friends, for the person who's in a similar situation like yourself, what would you say are the first steps to get out and just find these friendships and get there?
You know what, it's really fucking difficult. You know, I work with guys around it, you know, guys who are in their 40s and 50s who on the surface of things have everything, but they've got a real lack of connection and male friendships. You know, what do you do if you're not into drinking or you're not into sports? You know, you're not into like all these things which are like accepted ways of engaging in society and community. And it's really difficult. You know, I think as a society we've got these ways of being in community with each other which don't really serve us. You know, so for the guys who just feel like they're different or on the outside of things, or that they don't really fit in or conform in some way, it's a challenge. So asking like what the solution is, it's so unique to each individual, of just trial and error, of trying to figure it out as you go, and trying to find your tribe and people that you can connect with. You know, a real pivotal point for me around male role models was probably when I was living in Sydney in 2009 and 10. So during that time I was training to become a personal trainer and sports therapist. And it was the first time that I saw men in like care capacity roles. So learning about sport, about fitness, about massage, about anatomy and physiology, and about half of the faculty were male. And there were these really strong male figures, you know, they're like bodybuilders, they're like Australia as well, like everyone's about sport and fitness and looking good naked. Everyone looks absolutely immaculate. But they were these real gentle giants of men. You know, they were really tactile, you know, teaching you about massage, teaching you about respecting each other's bodies and about each other's differences, learning about anatomy and physiology through each other's bodies as well. So I remember one of the first classes that we had, it must have been about 2 weeks into this 2-year course, they got all the students to strip down to their underwear and take it in turns to stand at the front of the class in their underwear whilst people pointed out discrepancies on their bodies.
No way.
And this was done with complete respect. You know, they said, every single one of you is going to stand up here at the front. And the point of this is to start to become aware of your bodies and where there's discrepancies. So when I say discrepancies, I mean like a scoliosis of the spine, or like one breast being bigger than the other, or a shoulder dip, or a contortion of the spine, or a misalignment of the like hip, knee, and ankle joints. So it's starting to become more aware of how we move and functional anatomy, and how you can recognize patterns of movement and behavior in other people as well. But that lesson was absolutely pivotal in us as a class becoming so cohesive. And halfway through the course, like a couple of the faculty team said, we've never had a group of students like you before who've bonded this well. And we were from every continent. You know, we had so many people from South America. We had people from Croatia, Slovenia, Slovakia, Italy, France, Spain, Germany, Austria, England, Scotland, Ireland. Like, it was such a diverse range of people on that course, but we bonded so well together, and it was amazing. But the point being, the faculty members and these models of masculinity and how they held that space, how they were emotionally regulated, how they articulated themselves, how they spoke to us as adults, and how they just allowed us to feel safe and held. And that's the first time that I'd really seen it in that way before.
It's interesting, because I think growing up, you sort of see this, what's the ideal of a male figure? Like, what are the attributes? And you sort of, I don't know, the way you were describing it, sort of saying it's these sort of strong role models, or these sort of strong individuals that uphold these certain values, when really sort of the ones that really sort of open up, that can be vulnerable and be safe and have that level of empathy, is like, wow, that's a different version of a man that I've seen. And I think that's just as powerful than, you know, upholding values like responsibility or accountability, or just natural sort of tendencies that men, I think, in an older generation would have. And I really resonate with your story, because I was raised by my grandparents too, and my grandfather was a very sort of like man's man, but not very emotionally in tune. And my dad was very emotional, and we connected on an emotional level, and that was two very different sides to the story of one male doing it this way, and the other, like my dad, sort of feeling quite challenged in that way, but was very sort of open and created safe space in a way. So it's interesting that you sort of see these like bodybuilders or these sort of like strong individuals that can have this level of care and empathy, and have this level of understanding, and even just appreciating the anatomy and someone's form, which is of course, like, for anyone, quite like a hard thing to do, to stand in front of a class and be like, this is my body.
Massive.
And I'm not only do I have problems to appreciate my own uniqueness, but to then try and get a class to understand that as well it's really difficult. Like, it kind of goes against all the norms.
100%, yeah. And they did this other exercise where the tutor just got us to walk from the front of the class to the back of the class and back again.
Yeah.
So just to do like a gait analysis. And then he also said, okay, what do people notice about Christian's character when he did that? You know, he said, you know, you're strong, you're upright, you project this confidence in X, Y, and Z. And I said, I was fucking shitting myself.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't stand people looking at me like the way when I walk. I don't like people looking at the way that I stand, because I'm like hyper aware of like my body like moving in this way, or these angles being off, or, you know, like not liking certain aspects of my body. And to have other people say I project this other way of being, it's fascinating. You know, how do we perceive ourselves, and how do other people perceive us? And there's usually a big gap between those two things.
Totally. The other question I wanted to ask was, what is it that you feel fathers miss when raising like young adult, or just in terms of males that have the responsibility of raising their young, whether it's a male or a female? Do you feel like there are things that are missing in today?
Yeah, I think it's a thing of learnt behaviour. You know, so if we think about a child and a child's development, and you think about a kid going from kind of just lying on its back to learning to crawl, to learning to walk, and then learning actual functional movement. You know, if you see a kid pick a pen up off the ground, it'll generally do a perfect squat. But then as it grows up, it'll like hinge at the waist, and it'll pick it up by bending down to pick it up. And that's a learnt behaviour. So if we think about that blueprint that a child has, you know, it's not necessarily listening to what the parent says, it's doing what the parent does. So similarly to fathers and how they connect with their children in the relationship, they're generally acting on the blueprint that they had when they were children and their own fathers. it takes a lot for somebody to work on their self-awareness and to reflect on what their own childhood was like, their own relationship with their father figures or male role models, and to think, was that healthy? Was it safe? Was it appropriate? Was it traumatic? And what do I need to do differently? So again, if you think about culture, religion, society, what those values are that we inherit, because most people inherit their religion, if it's not something that you actively question with critical thought and questions around those things, then generally you might not consider what that relationship is like. So when you ask what's missing, people won't even realize that something is missing and think about what that is.
Yeah.
So if you just look at the language that's used between raising a boy and raising a girl, just the connotations of particular language, the colour of the clothes that you dress them in, the toys that you give them. You know, you might give boys cars and dinosaurs. You might give girls like princesses and dresses and makeup and dressing up and things. So from the earliest age and just language that you use, you're already conditioning boys and girls to act and behave in a certain way and teaching them ways of expressing themselves. So if you think about a young boy who falls over and like cuts his knee and starts crying, you know, you'll generally pick him up and say, oh, you know, but be brave, don't cry.
Yeah.
You're such a good little man.
Yeah.
Little man. You're expecting a child to act like a man. You're expecting them to emotionally regulate instead of saying, oh, are you all right? Let's have a look at it. You know, that's probably really sore, and actually empathizing with them instead. Whereas if you did the same thing with a girl, the language and the care that you'd give would be very different. So again, this idea of how do we treat children, regardless of if they're a boy or a girl, it needs to be age appropriate.
Yeah.
And how you're actually talking to them and handling them, and essentially they're learning to regulate from your own behavior. You know, so we either self-regulate, co-regulate, independent, interdependent. Each of these different ways that we have of being in a relationship, we're learning constantly, and a child will always look for a threat from a parent. So if they see a situation that they're in which is different, they'll look to the parent for some kind of cue. So whether that's a facial expression or a pulling away or a different change of the tone in voice, even if they don't understand the language, they'll understand on a nervous system response the fight or flight responses that the parents are modelling for them.
It's very interesting because when I was a kid, I've never met my dad, so I was lacking of like men role models as well. I used to spend the majority of my times with like, girls playing outside. But my brother, who was a lot older than me, he used to kind of take a lot of piss out of me when I was a kid, just like bully me. And then as he was growing up, he kind of realized that it was a bad thing because when he was a kid, his dad used to do the same thing for him because we are from different dad. And I remember he used to call me and just say, I'm really sorry for what I did. And that happened quite recently, like probably 5-6 years ago, when he actually apologized to me. And at that time, I didn't really paid attention to that. But as I grew older, I realized that it's a generational trauma, and he was simply acting subconsciously on how his dad used to treat him. So I was this guy. He thought that he's supposed to act or like deal with these problems just normally.
Yeah.
And then I just grew to realize that, like, yes, I'm feeling sorry. Like, I'm feeling sorry for you that you had to go through that to kind of realize that it's wrong.
Yeah.
For you to say that to me. So, it's just a subconscious behavior, I guess. Raising your kids based on your own experiences or how you experienced it.
Yeah, 100%. And what's it like thinking retroactively on that, of him apologizing? What's it like to think about that apology now and how you receive that?
Well, at first I thought he's just like, what are you apologizing for? But then I kind of realized that he's really feeling down about it and bad. And now we getting along really well. And I think him apologizing me and then me going to Iceland a couple of times, we kind of bonded really well. And I used to see him as this man who was always grumpy and angry and just rude. But now when I went to Iceland last year, I saw his eyes kind of changed. He looks a lot more welcoming and empathetic and warm. And that was really interesting because I've never seen my brother in that kind of state. Whereas now is a lot more he feels like a brother now. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting thing actually, because you do things at times, you're so hurt, and you do the same things on other people without realizing that you are the problem. Not necessarily you're the problem, but you carry something that you want to just perceive onto other people.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Has your brother gone through his own sort of journey of self-work? And
I wouldn't necessarily say he did self-work, but I think he was mature enough to realize that it wasn't a good thing to treat a kid like that. And that itself kind of was a self-work, you could call it. Cause,
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
You know, reflecting on his own behaviour, taking responsibility for it, actually speaking to you about it as well, like the bravery that's involved in that.
Very strong, yeah.
And taking accountability for that.
Courageous.
And then just for you as well, and like seeing that change in him, and then what that's allowed for both of you to grow as an individuals, as you know, in your relationship as brothers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sorry, what was that a question?
No, just an acknowledgement.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, now that our relationship is really, like, I can see is like we talk a lot more, and we talk for hours, where before it used to be like 15 minutes, 10 minutes, if that. We just used to talk because we're family, but not really. But now it's a lot more, what's the word? Just deeper. Yeah, definitely.
No, it's really interesting, your point, just going back to it, where obviously it's like boys choosing like dinosaurs and things like that, or swords, where it tends to be like quite tribalistic. And I don't know if you've ever read a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy.
I'm in the process of reading it now.
It's really interesting because he talks about a theory where you have a generation of men that obviously fought at war or at wars, and with the majority of those men being away, you had more female roles that were sort of like teachers or in schools, where they would be sort of around younger men or young boys. And then those boys would grow up with the majority of women or absent fathers. And then it talks about how those men would then project sort of potentially what those insecurities were onto, I think it was the baby boomers or the millennial generation that is now. And I sort of read that theory, and I was like, do you know what, that does make sense, because I could see that happening sort of in my own sort of family timeline, where you have sort of this generation of men that weren't around. And I think for a lot of the time, where like my grandmother, for example, was the one that raised my parents, and then my dad wasn't necessarily around so much because his dad wasn't around so much. And it was kind of this kind of drip fed kind of, or this sort of like generational sort of sense of the word of like, how do I try and stop that with me? How can I sort of not take on the baggage of sort of previous generations of shit? And I suppose that sort of comes in the sense of trying to become more self-aware of yourself. And again, like with your story, and I think you having faced a lot of challenges and adversity, and sort of where you're sort of in the position where you're questioning like yourself and the people that you're around, and growing up around people that don't resonate or fit in. It takes that sort of out of the box thinking. And was that sort of what spurred you on to want to care for others more? You'd gone down the fitness journey, you'd gone down the sort of the personal training journey, and then going into sort of wanting to help others on a more deep and meaningful way. Did that all sort of add up to wanting to do that?
Yeah, I think so. Again, this idea of my grandmother and the values and morals that she had of do good, be good, help others. That was definitely like a real core value that I've had, whether I've recognised it or not, before becoming a counsellor. You know, people have always opened up to me from a very early age, just about very confronting and challenging traumatic experiences. So that's always been a theme in my life. I'd say that I've always felt things quite deeply as well, from just having empathy and compassion for the people. But just quickly to touch back on a point that you mentioned before about a lack of like men raising boys. You know, if we look at stats and figures today, so less than 20% of teachers are male. You know, less than 20% of therapists are male. You know, I'm not quite sure what the stats are currently on how many homes are single parents, where they're just being raised by females, but I know that it's high. So in each of these different areas, you've got a lack of men modeling appropriate behavior, emotional regulation, healthy masculinity. And like you said, if it's all just being taught or a perception from women, it's like, where does that balance come in? Or is it even accurate to be done in that way? But then going back to the question that you just asked, which has just gone out of my head.
Was this sort of a problem that you could see that you wanted to be more involved in?
Yeah, I think, again, being a personal trainer and what that was like, seeing how many people, particularly in the fitness industry, have body dysmorphia, it's astronomical, absolutely astronomical. And we know that nowadays as well. We look at young boys and how they're training and how they go to the gym and what they think about their own bodies. They've got to have a six-pack, they've got to have a certain amount of muscle mass. They think about the penis size, how sexually proactive they are, what it means to be a man and display as a man, and what it means to be a man in relation to other men or to women that you're sleeping with.
Yeah.
All these connotations that we put on these different things and how we identify and how we think we need to be perceived in order to have status or meaning or value or purpose or to be respected by other people. So, yeah, in answer to your question, simply, I do think it's massively impacted and affected why I want to go into these spaces and create spaces for other men to be able to just open up and actually be authentic.
Yeah.
But it really takes a position of modelled vulnerability for other men to feel safe and open up in kind. So I appreciate that's a bit of a blanket statement, but I volunteered with a charity called Mentel, and they run free peer-to-peer support works for men on a weekly basis, and they do absolutely fantastic work. And the framework and the structure that they have for that charity is around modelled vulnerability. So if you're a facilitator within that charity, it's not an intellectual concept of you just holding space and letting other people talk about their struggles and challenges. You're talking about your own struggles and challenges as well. And that's what makes a difference. If we're expecting men to open up and to talk, we need to be able to meet them in kind. I don't think that most people have the language or the skills to hold other people's emotions. We're constantly saying, open up, talk to us. If you're struggling, reach out. But most people don't know how to fucking respond to that. And it's not a slight against them. It's an acknowledgement of like, we don't have the language or the tools to be able to receive other people's emotions when they're challenged. How hard is it to hear that somebody wants to kill themselves? How hard is it that they want to start cutting themselves or self-harming in some way, or that they don't think they've got any value or purpose in the world? Like, how do we hold that? It's a challenge. But it's a really simple solution. You just need to be present.
Yeah.
As men, we constantly think that we have to have a solution or an answer to somebody, and it's our go-to setting, isn't it? To actually problem solve our way out of a situation. And sometimes we just need to acknowledge that you don't have the answer, you don't have the solution, but it's enough simply to be present and to be in a space with somebody and to witness what they're going through and just to let them know that they're not alone and that you care.
I totally agree, because it's okay not to have the answer, right? And it's okay to, and it's interesting because I think, and this is something that I read, that we tend to therapize men through the same sort of that we give to females.
Yeah, we treat male depression the same way we treat female depression. So when females want to feel loved and accepted, men wants to feel powerful and capable. So that's that kind of the difference. But we're trying to accept and be lovable to one, which is completely fine. But we need to encourage them to kind of be these not powerful. I'm not having a person in mind like a masculine, powerful man, but he's just more capable of things, I guess.
Yeah, yes and no is my response to that. Like, yes, there is an element of that, but some men do want to be held. And some people do want to be able to express themselves in ways that they've not been able to before. And for others, it is that they want to feel capable and have that sense of self and identity and self-worth. And it's obviously unique and appropriate to each individual. But for individuals that don't have that sense of self or that identity or understand their own morals or values, exactly what you've just said there, creating spaces where they consider who they are, what's important to them. Is it their own values that are causing them a disruption? And generally it isn't. Is that they're living somebody else's values, and therefore they're in conflict with their own. So even like 1 degree of separation is going to cause a friction there.
Hey guys, your feedback is very important. And no, this is not an advertisement. Actually, what I'm asking from you is to leave a comment below what you liked and most importantly, what you disliked about this episode, because we can improve on the next episodes and we can make a better content for you to listen. Give us also a topics you'd like to us talking about, and we can prepare, do your research and talk about it on the next episodes. Thank you.
It's really I can imagine it's so challenging to try and get someone to understand and feel courageous when they don't have any self-worth or self-respect for them, let alone like not having their own morals or values, or they've modeled it on someone else that they feel like they've resonated with a bit, but it doesn't make up any part of who they are. And I think for men as well, it's one of those things where there's a level of pressure or a level of stigma to how to be and how to act. Yeah. And this sort of like having to push it down and, you know, remain strong and to have that sense of responsibility for others and be that shoulder to lean on. But then
100%.
How do you lean on other people's shoulders? How do you show vulnerability? And a big thing is we're actually all a part of the Jiu-Jitsu community, and the first thing that I resonated with, not only was it just a fun and a great sport to be, was during your role or during your training, it'd be like, how's it going, man? How are you? Yeah. How are you feeling today? And there was this camaraderie and knowing that other people were going through the same issues that you were going through and not feeling so alone. Yeah. Because I think a lot of the time men have tendencies just to isolate themselves and to think that their problem is their problem. And it's so hard to, even for friends of mine that I feel are close, and saying, how are you? It's like, yeah, I'm okay. But it's like, how are you really feeling? Yeah. You know, it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to feel like, you know, the world's against you a bit. We're all feeling it. And how do you get someone to see their own values and to see that they're a capable, responsible, courageous human being without them feeling like so down and out? Like it's I imagine that's such a big challenge.
Yeah, massively. It really is. And again, you know, suicide is the biggest killer of men under 50 in the UK. Yeah. You know, 70%, 75%, I think it is, of all suicides are male. You know, that's a huge statistic. So when we talk about men and their ability to cope with things, or to ask for help rather, they'll wait until crisis point if they ask at all. You know, so they're already at the point when they're thinking potentially, if they're on that route, of taking their own life. You know, it won't be when they're just stressed or anxious because they don't want to feel like they can't, you know, hold it all together for the wife, for the family, in the job, in the career, with the friends, you know, being that shoulder to lean on, being that rock all the time for somebody else, but, you know, feeling like they're drowning inside. So what you're saying about, you know, having that sense of community and camaraderie through jiu-jitsu is absolutely amazing. And there's another aspect to that as well, which I really find fascinating. I want to explore more in the work that I'm doing, which is nurturing touch between men. You know, so again, this idea of sex and intimacy being a way for men to engage in touch. But what does touch look like between men? So if you take jiu-jitsu, for example, you know, that's a very physical sport. It's a way of engaging, of pitting yourself against one another, but you've got a real community from what you guys have said of jiu-jitsu and in other martial arts as well. You know, you've got this discipline, you've got this respect, you've got a way of meeting each other, a way of being able to express emotion, express physicality. But if we just bring it all the way back down to touch between men, there's something incredibly nurturing about that.
Totally agree.
You know, even though you're in competition or fighting or sparring with each other, there's something inherent about touch that we need to be nurtured as human beings. So if we take this back to being children and how children are conditioned and raised, you know, what kind of touch we'll give to girls, what kind of touch we'll give to boys, what those narratives will look like, and what expression looks like as well for men. So we see a lot of things in the media around like ADHD and attention and neurodiversity, and we're looking at boys in schools and seeing, you know, why are they being disruptive? Why can't they focus? Why can't they do X, Y, and Z? It's because we're putting them in a fucking classroom for 7 hours a day and expecting them to sit still.
Exactly.
You know, what the fuck? Of course they're not going to be able to sit still. You know, they need to express themselves. They've got so much testosterone and hormones pumping through the body. We're meant to move. You look at the Scandinavian countries, they might only have like a 3-hour school day and 2 hours of those are play. Yeah. You know, up until like the age of 7 or something like around that age. I can't remember the stats exactly. But they understand, age appropriate functionality, movement, how the brain's developing, how these individuals and young children are developing. Take that all the way up to adulthood. What's your relationship with touch and how you have expression, how you're able to regulate your emotions, how you're able to express your emotions. So you guys were talking before around these ways of counselling men and it being different to women. But then the emotional regulation, as a man, what emotions do you feel are appropriate for you to be able to express publicly? So if we think about crying, for example, or extreme anger, where is it appropriate to show those things? At a funeral, in a sporting game, anything outside of that? And the answer to that will be very different person to person. But what about like happiness and joy? What about celebrating yourself, celebrating all your wins? That inner voice of how you talk to yourself and how you accurately take a snapshot of your life and acknowledge all the wins that you've got or all the challenges that you're facing. What does your inner voice sound like? Is it super critical or is it like your biggest champion?
It's fascinating, 'cause going back to like the school point as well, sort of being told off for making connections with other friends of yours in the classroom, that sort of being such a critical point to find a voice for yourself, and how that's such a challenge for young males in that sense, where there isn't that sort of forward thinking especially in the UK. And again, like in Scandinavia, there seems to be a bit more of that, where it is more play. It is sort of like focusing on what children might need right now. But going back to also the touch thing as well, like even with like friends of mine, it tends to be like a bro hug or like a handshake, but actually like hugging your friend or like hugging, like for example with me and my brother, the hugs that we give each other are like a sense of reassurance and feeling like that person's in the room with you. It's not just like a quick snap hug. It's like, actually, I don't feel okay today. I need you to hold me. And I think there's a difference between being held by your partner, being a female, especially for me, and the difference between, I don't know, hugging you or hugging another friend of mine, where it's like feels different. And how to make that more accepting is, I can imagine, is such a big challenge, just to change the mind frame and change the mindset of men that haven't had that their whole life, especially if their dads are not emotionally connecting with them either.
100%. And it's a big thing that we see on the retreats as well. Like, as you were saying that, it really brings to mind this guy that I know, Dimitri, Russian guy. He's about 6'5", 6'6". I'm 6'2". Fucking hell, when I get a hug off this guy, I start crying. And I think there's a real transference for me there around seeing him as a father figure. So being held by a man who's bigger than me and feeling like, even though, again, my granddad would have been affectionate with me and whatnot, I don't recall having that from my real dad. And I think there's something in me on a nervous system level that feels like a small child being held by this guy who's 6'5". And it's like regressing into that childlike state, and it's a big thing. And he just holds me. He's like, it's all right, and he'll just literally hold on as long as I need, and he'll just let me cry for a bit. And I'm like, God, mate, I'm sorry, I don't even know where that's come from. Like, I feel absolutely fine, but you've just literally turned me into a bubbling wreck. And it's actually just being able to give somebody the space and just being comfortable in that. Sometimes we do just need to be held.
It's interesting about the hugs, because every time we used to finish jiu-jitsu, it's probably 6 or 7 of us were walking home to the same direction, and 2 of these people were Rupert and Charlie, and as we're saying bye, we hug each other. But then I remember once I saw Charlie and Rupert hug, and it felt like it was on a completely different level. Like the energy around them was a completely different level, because you can tell they're twins, and they're like, let me know when you get home. But it's just the care about it as well. It was really, really fascinating.
It is fascinating. And again, like, my journey over the last 5 years and the new male friendships that I've made is, I feel completely blessed. Like, again, these guys, the way that they'll check up on me, the way that I'll check up on them, the way that we'll just give each other time and space. Sometimes we'll spend time together like half a day and we won't even talk that much.
Exactly.
But it's just the presence and the awareness and knowing that somebody's got your back. one of the guys that I work with, Angga Kara, he's from Indonesia. He also runs his own retreats. He called me one day. He'd just been struggling with something, and he said, "Oh mate, have you got any time coming up?" It's like, "Yeah, let's go out at the weekend." We went out near Lady Barra Reservoir, which is in the Peak District, beautiful area, just rolling hills and reservoirs all around. And we just went for a little walk together, and we just went up for a stone circle up there, which I didn't even know existed. It was absolutely stunning, beautiful summer day. And I said, "What do you need?" He's like, "Nothing really." I said, "I just need you to be present." So we were just sat at this stone circle having a drink, and he just bawled his eyes out, and I just sat with him just while he just needed to express. And I said, "Why don't you just give a scream? Why don't you just shout it out?" And he did, and he just did this absolutely fucking belly roar of a scream, and then just continued to cry his eyes out. It wasn't pretty crying, it was snot and dribble and fucking everything, and it was fucking great. It's exactly what he fucking needed. And you felt the energy just leaving him, being ripped out of his body. And we need that. The way that you guys talk about jiu-jitsu, there's going to be a real aspect of that, I imagine.
Yeah.
Even though you might not be crying or expressing in a certain way, you're getting stuff out of your nervous system, out of your bodies, and you're being held by other men in a way which suits you and is appropriate for you. And there's a dynamic there of how you're holding and receiving each other in whatever capacity that is.
Sorry, you go.
Sorry, my friend used to say, because he does martial arts, but he's more into mixed martial arts. And he used to say, I love the gym because as soon as I hit it, all my worries are gone. And that's so true, because after jiu-jitsu, and I met his brother Charlie through jiu-jitsu, and we always used to roll and just do exercises together. But we used to talk a lot, and we spoke so many times about my problems, his problems, and then after the training, you break a little bit of sweat, and it feels like, I left everything behind it, and tomorrow is a new day, and you have a completely different perspective after the class.
Yeah, I think, sorry to just to chime in there as well with sort of similar point from the experiences that I've had is with the men that are in there, there's no ego at all. There's this complete removal sense of an ego attached. And I think when you're sort of in a role or in a challenge, especially in an exercise sense, and I've seen it when I've gone to the gym with friends of mine as well, when you're exerting energy, and there's this sort of transference of, it's not about whether or not someone's bigger than you or more stronger than you, but I think when you're equally challenging yourselves in a physical sense, there's this sort of removal of an ego and this more sort of a transcendence of understanding and empathy. Because I think a lot of the time men walk around either sizing themselves up or against other men as well. And I've noticed that sort of living in a city a lot of the time is when you, even if I see men at my work that come and order food, there seems to be this sort of not so much eye contact or confidence or not necessarily present with themselves versus the men that I see it sort of doing a physical exercise like jiu-jitsu or something where there seems to be more of a connection. There seems to be a lot more sort of pent-up anger. But I think when I found my experience of jiu-jitsu where that sort of ego is removed and you're wrestling with someone that's potentially bigger than you or stronger than you, you're like, okay, I feel like I can remove parts of myself where I just want to open up and connect more. It's quite an interesting experience.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah, you should come and give it a go.
Yeah.
Going to your retreats, what can someone expect? What does it sort of look like?
Sure, yeah. So our retreats, we've just started doing day retreats this year as well, but they generally tend to last for 3 days. So arrive on a Friday, leave on a Sunday.
Okay.
And if you think about the Sunday as like a landing, just everyone getting to know each other, we all contract with each other, choose and agree upon appropriate behaviour and what it means, each of those words that we choose. We really drill down on what each word means to each man. And then we contract to that and agree to that for the course of the weekend. And also just that we can change our mind on things as well. So it's this recognition that we're all there for our own reasons, but there's a holding collectively of each other and supporting each other on the journeys as well. But also recognizing the capacity that you have at any given time to be there for someone else or to be focusing on yourself. So thinking about the Friday as a landing, and then the Saturday is a real deep dive into why you're there, what you're struggling with, and being able to express that articulate it, having it held and witnessed by the group. And then the Sundays are resurfacing. So looking towards the future, what it is that you want to do and achieve, and giving you the skills and the tools to get there. So throughout the course of the weekend, it's a combination of like coaching skills and practices, psychoeducation, to understand why you think and act the way that you do, breaking that down and giving people more context. And then also somatic practices as well. So basically practices that they can start using to regulate the nervous system. So like breath work and cold water therapy exposure, stuff like that. So just bringing in that level of discomfort and showing how you can deal with discomfort in ways, and then bring your mind back to the present moment. You know, so much of the time we get lost in our own minds, like worrying about the future or ruminating on the past, you know, anxiety, depression, suppression of emotions. And using things like the breath, we'll take them into the nervous systems and see what's actually being stored where in the bodies. And it's really different for each individual. You know, every breathwork class that I've been a participant on, I've had a very different responses, and some of them have been hilarious. Like sometimes you might laugh, sometimes you might cry, sometimes you might start shaking or convulsing. You know, it's just dependent on what you've going on. And for some men that have never done that before and never really connected with their emotions, they'll have these responses and they'll be like, fucking hell, what have you done to us? I feel like you've just cracked me open like a walnut. It's like, it's okay, like talk about that. What's been coming up for you? What's been there? You know, I think back to one retreat that we did last December. We had 16 guys there. And one of the guys had never been to anything like that before, never done any kind of body work. And after the retreat had finished, he messaged me like 2 days later. He said, oh mate, you know, I'd just gone for some food with my wife the following evening with the kids. The kids went to play like out the back of the garden in the pub. And he said, I just broke down crying in front of my wife in the pub. And she was like, what's the matter? And he said, God, I just miss the guys. I just miss the guys that I've been with this weekend, because I've never spoken to men before the way that I spoke to them. And I've never been received by men and held by men in that way. And I just didn't realize it was possible to be in community or relationship with men in that dynamic before. That's huge. You know, and like the way that we'll check in with guys afterwards, because it is a real roller coaster, you know, guys coming onto a retreat with us, and there's a lot of misconceptions around what we do. You know, some guys think it's going to be hyper masculine, other guys will think it's really woo woo hippy dippy shit. And it's just completely different to anything that they might have experienced before. You know, and it's the fear of the unknown as well. And also the idea, again, of asking for help or seeking support or trying something different, and just the fear that induces in people. Understandably, why wouldn't it? You know, you've got something that you're struggling with, you don't know how to articulate it, you don't even know what it means, you don't even know if it's real or not. You know, that's another big thing. Guys that I see that don't think they have the right to ask for help, or they don't even understand what's wrong. So why do they feel dysregulated or like they're depressed or anxious? You know, if you can't even name it or give it a shape, it's like, what do you do with it? So it's trying to get that message across to them in the right way. Just say, look, it's just a place where you can be yourself. It's like, fuck, what does that look like?
Yeah.
You know, I've only ever projected this mask of what a man should be: a father, a son, a provider, a worker. You know, who am I at my core level?
Just wanted to ask about the breathwork exercises. What does that look like?
Sure. So Andy, the guy that does our breath work, he does a modality called conscious connected breath. So it's really simple. You're just not pausing or doing anything else between the breaths. So it's a forced inhalation and then it's a relaxed exhalation. But it's all done to, he guides the entire process, and it's done to like a playlist of music as well. So it's this building up of energy and emotion, and then it's like a bringing back down to earth again. But it's tapping into different areas of the body and seeing what's stored there. You know, so if we think about anxiety, generally people have like stomach issues or they feel it in the gut. You know, if there's problems with communication, people sometimes like grind the teeth or clamp the jaw or feel like they've got something choking going on in the throat. So people will store different traumas or energies or emotions in their bodies, and breathwork gives them a way to start opening that up and freeing that out.
One of your exercises I've seen was, I'm not sure if I going to name it correctly, but it's a fire therapy.
Fire ceremony.
Fire ceremony. So,
Yeah.
could you get into this a bit more? Because I feel Rupert did a very similar thing where you mentioned a story where he wrote the letter, he put that into the fire, and it kind of had this relief, relief of emotion. But just could you get into the ceremony?
Yeah, for sure. So similarly, like we can do it in a couple of different ways. So we do an exercise around embarrassment, guilt, and shame, and that might be something that you've done to someone else, or something that's been done to you, or a trauma, or anything. And we explore that in a way which isn't too confronting. You know, you don't have to say what it is. You can either write it down, or we can give guys like an object, for example, like a piece of wood or a piece of string, and we take them through this whole process of this exercise as to what to do. But then they've got the option of what they do with that. So if it's a letter, it will be burnt. But if it's another piece of equipment, something natural like a stone or wood or string or something, they can either burn it or they can bury it. And it's this idea of like transmuting something. So we hold on to something so much in our lives. Again, we store it if we don't, in our bodies, if we're not articulating it in some way. And it's the idea of what capacity do you have to let go of something? You know, if you've made a mistake, do you constantly ruminate on that and beat yourself up for it? You know, if you've done something which you're embarrassed by or feel guilty for, you know, like lying on your resume or cheating on a girlfriend or something like that, or something else which is more traumatic that has been done to you, you know, there's no control over that, but you think that you're responsible for something that happened to you, and you're not. So we hold on to all these different things in different ways, and the way we take the guys through the exercise, it's asking them the question, what do you have capacity to let go of around this, if anything? And if it's just the idea of letting go and you can't let go of anything at the moment, then just acknowledging that. And then by giving something to the fire, if it's the paper, or we can bury it, and we'll like go into the forest and we'll bury like a piece of wood or a piece of string. And this idea that something will decompose over time. And sometimes it takes time. You know, we live in a society where we want instant answers to everything right away. We want to be free of like sadness or guilt or shame or whatever the emotion is, whatever the challenge is that we're struggling with. We don't know necessarily how to sit with those emotions and allow them to be, because we find them all consuming, or because we've never been taught how to feel into those and that they're appropriate feelings and emotions to have.
Yeah.
You know, if you take grief, for example, grief is all consuming, you know, but there's so many different types of grief. You know, what happens if you've had a relationship breakdown? What if somebody's cheated on you? You know, what if you really trusted somebody and they broke your trust in a way that you never thought was possible, and it's completely shaken you to your core? There's a grief around that. There's a way of trying to process that. And the thing with grief is it never really leaves you. It's simply that you become more familiar with it. Yeah, it becomes a known quantity. But it's the idea that your life will grow around your grief. You know, as you have more experiences in life, it's not necessarily that the pain will go away or the sadness. It's more that, again, familiar. It becomes familiar.
Just get comfortable with the feeling, I guess, and the process of it.
Yeah, and the fact that it'll come up again and again, you know, but there'll be some longer stretches in between those things, and it takes time to work through something.
It's funny because when I did my version of burning and letting go as part of me, I sort of, in that moment, felt like that was the right thing to do, but it didn't come straight away, you know. And like you were saying, living in a society where we expect things to change so much, we don't give our bodies enough time to actually process and take and have the feelings that they're supposed to have, because we expect it to change so quickly. It's like going to one session at the gym, you're not going to notice a change. It's straight away. It's taking repetitive action, and I guess that's also taking repetitive understanding. I imagine that men coming to your retreats, it's saying you're not going to get fixed straight away, but this is the turning point in which you start to sort of digest and understand things more about yourself.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah,
it's acknowledging it. It's the first thing is like acknowledging that process.
Yeah,
and then it's like, yeah, what do you need to change, or what do you need to implement on a daily basis? Because like you said, repetition and habit. You know, we're accumulation of our habits that we do on a daily basis. You know, that's what formulates our entire life. You know, if we wanted to become a millionaire and an influencer and this, that, and the other, people think it can just happen overnight, or you know, you can just get one video that goes viral, and it isn't. It's consistent every single day. So when you think about your mindset, and again, like, what were you taught about mindset at school? Fucking nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing.
There's
Nothing at all.
Yeah.
You know, what did your parents teach you? Probably nothing. And it's not that they were bad parents, it's that they didn't have a clue about it.
It's not aware of it,
No. So going back to like what you were saying earlier on around, you know, this idea of like what a parent is or what a father is, you know, they're only doing the best that they can potentially with the information that they had and based on their own experiences. But it takes a point of self-reflection and self-awareness to think, okay, what does my behavior look like? What do my habits look like? What do my thoughts look like? What do my emotions look like? How do I process each of those things? How do I express them? How do I be in relationship with somebody else? I'm expecting somebody else to constantly fix me and have the answers. I'm expecting somebody to constantly rescue me. Or do I go through all the challenges myself and learn how to go through each of those situations? So if you look at the education system, in my opinion, it teaches us nothing of fucking value. Think about sex education, for example. Most people self-educate through porn. You know, we've got the whole Me Too movement, for example, which I know is a very loaded subject. But if we're looking at boys and young men, what conversations are we genuinely having with them which are authentic? So where's this quality of eldership and leadership from older men to younger men? And what I mean by that is there's so much fear in the education system about how we're talking about sex and education to young people. And I appreciate it's a very difficult subject because you've got religion, culture, society, you've got so many different views and opinions, and they come from very different perspectives. But ultimately, how are we teaching young men and women to care for themselves? How do you articulate that you don't want to do something? What does verbal consent look like? What does non-verbal consent look like? Have you ever heard of that? Have you ever heard anyone even say that to you? What does non-verbal consent look like? You know, what happens if you change your mind partway through something? What happens as a male if you're not comfortable with something? And what happens if you're feeling pain for the first time because your foreskin's too tight? What happens if you have premature ejaculation because you're so overstimulated? There's so many fear around all these things. But if we think about the porn that we see, it's not real to life. You know, it's complete performance. It's complete entertainment. That's the whole purpose of it. It's to get you to ejaculate as fast as you can. So where's the conversation around that sex is a language? You know, love is a language. Intimacy is a language. You know, what do each of those things look like in their own right? What do those words mean to you? What's the difference between sex? What's the difference between fucking? What's the difference between making love? You know, really different things.
It's insane because in terms of the sex education that you had at school, it was this is the types of contraception, this is the dangers that you will face if you're having unprotected sex. That's it. And like you were saying, like where's the establishing an emotional connection with someone? Where's the sharing of trust? Where's the sort of, like you were saying, understanding boundaries? And not only that, like not even talking just about heterosexual relationships, but you know, same-sex relationships and all that. Like where does it's like you were saying, because it's also so individual. Like some parents might not want their kids to learn that sort of thing, but it's hard because I agree that school didn't really mean anything for me because it wasn't something where it was teaching them anything of any value. Like if you think about sex, like you will come across that in your life. And how do you go about teaching that subject? And like, how do you go about solving that? It's
how do you talk about it as a parent? You know, like what's your level of comfort talking about that with your children? You know, I was at a festival a couple of years ago called Butterfield. It's a Buddhist festival, and they actually have like naked saunas and a lot of people like walking around naked. It's like really chilled out. It's a really nice space to be in. But I met a woman there, and she was telling me about her 2 children that she has. I think the girl was like 11 and the boy was probably 10 or 12. And just her acknowledgement of them coming up to puberty and what those conversations were going to look like. And we had this fantastic conversation around how excited she was to be having this conversation with her daughter and how her husband was excited to have the conversation with her son. So this idea of like losing your virginity as a woman and how she's going to start articulating that and framing that for her daughter. And she's like saying to me, you know, virginity isn't just losing your virginity in through standard penetrative sex. It's like, what about the first time that she gets fingered? What about the first time that a boy goes down on her? What about the first time that she explores her own body? Like each of these experiences are nuanced in their own right and can be incredibly beautiful. But if we think about each man in this room, what our first sexual experience was, when did we discover our penis? You know, when did we have a wet dream? When did we start to notice that we were attracted to a man or a woman or something else or someone else? Each of these things are so nuanced. And what conversations can we have as parents with our children, or as elders in society with younger men in society that don't have those role models?
Yeah, it's interesting. My mum used to live in Spain, it was southern Spain in Cornell, and a lot of the time during the summers, you would see a lot of like women there, but also mothers there with their children. A lot of the time, they would be tanning without their bikini tops on, and it was interesting because you'd see tourists there that would sort of be looking, but the locals, because it's something that they see a lot of daily, they're not sexualizing like women's breasts. And it's a really interesting topic of conversation. I think a lot of the time, because we avoid having these conversations so much, it seems so taboo.
Yeah.
And it creates a lot of uncomfortability in people. Like, when was the last time, or when did anyone as a male have a chat with their male friends about their penis or their foreskin? Or I might have a problem. Like, it's not verbalized or made comfortable enough, and it creates more of a social issue in a way.
100%. It really, really does. Being able to actually have open conversations like this are fantastic. There's a gentleman that I follow on Instagram. He owns a profile called Gents Body Confidence, and it's all around male body positivity. So any aspect of your body like that you're not comfortable with, or you might feel shy around, penis size, and he does so many great articles and opens up the conversations as to what is it like as a man, what is it like as a gay man. So just that difference in and of itself, body positivity, or the expectation to look good naked, these unrealistic expectations to have this immaculate body, to present in this way all the time, or to have this sexual prowess, or a penis of a certain size, or to be able to come a certain amount, or, all these different things of what we perceive ourselves needing to be. And actually, who are we really? What is important to us? We're born the way that we're born. We have the bodies that we have. We're exactly as nature intended us to be. It's as simple as that. But how many of us feel comfortable in that?
Totally. And going back to the porn issue, we have a mutual friend of ours, James, who's a psychotherapist, and we were talking with him about what are things that he sees a lot of in the men that he sees, and he was like, porn addiction is a huge thing. And where you're looking at, I always think if something's free, you're the product. So if you have access to porn online, which is so like prevalent and so immediate, and that's the majority of what men are looking at, and it's more prevalent in the UK, porn addiction, and sort of being that performance, seeing an overly large penis, the average size of a penis on porn generally is sort of like 7 inches or 7.5, and actually that's like totally not true in the norm of sense of things. And then sort of saying, I've got to live up to this expectation of this man that's performing and giving like essentially a fake orgasm to another performer, and that's now I'm going to try and repeat that in the bedroom because I think that that's what she's going to like.
100%.
And that not being the case at all, but actually trying to create a safe, vulnerable space that's shared in between two people, where you're opening up your sort of heart and soul more and having eye contact and things like that. So much to be said for that. And I feel like that's an immediate issue that isn't being spoken about enough today, and I imagine you see a lot of that at your men's retreats.
And the retreat work that I do, and in the counselling work that I do. Any addiction, it's generally there's in my opinion, there's 2 reasons why people take drugs. It's either to heighten an experience, or it's to escape something. And porn's no different. And the difference with porn is it's dopamine chasing. So it's feeling that happy hormone all the time, and you're retraining your brain to feel happiness and get that dopamine hit every time that you masturbate and watch porn. And then it has to get a fix in a different way. So then the use of porn and the types of porn that you'll watch will start progressing in potentially very negative ways and dangerous ways. But the difficulty with porn addiction is it's simply that you have to cut it out. And it's one of the most difficult things to do. But again, this idea of what does it mean to be in a relationship with somebody else and to have sex and intimacy. So again, going to the deeper roots as to, okay, why does this addiction exist? And for most, it's a coping strategy. It might be that they're bored, it might be that they're lonely, it might be that they're super stressed. And it's just one way of them feeling an ounce of pleasure in a life which is just fraught with anxiety and fear and overwhelm.
So it's like almost asking yourself the question. It's like, are you actually horny, or are you just doing it for the sake of like watching it, right?
Yeah. How many times have we had a wank just before bed just so we can go to sleep?
Yeah.
It's the easiest thing to do, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, standard.
It's also so acceptable for that. Do you know what I mean? And I'm so glad that there's a conversation happening around that, because people could, like, I can see how men would see that as a problem, or like, oh, maybe I'm just a bit fucked up. And it's like, no, we all go through the same thing, man.
Yeah, it's
like,
completely just standard.
Cool. Like, it's
just reacting to the stress.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
It's like, no wonder I can't get hold of you on some days.
Yeah, that FaceTime comes in at the wrong time. Shit.
The reason I was late today. No, it's fascinating, and I imagine like it's across all ages as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like just masturbating as a theme in itself, you know, having a wank, just the shame that exists around that, you know, particularly in religion, you know, particular faith backgrounds.
Yeah,
it's the most natural thing in the world. But again, trying to find this balance point between, this is probably something that you do every day, but where does it become an issue? You know, you see like a big movement at the moment of like no fap, you know, so it's like taking it to one extreme, taking it to another extreme, like X, Y, and Z. It's how do we actually teach guys to self-regulate? You know, what feels healthy to you? What doesn't feel healthy to you? Where is it negatively impacting your relationships, or to be able to socialize in a different way? And the answer is going to be different from person to person, you know.
So how do you find that? I guess that balance for yourself.
I suppose it's reflecting on like how much you're having, how many times are you wanking a day, for example, or a week? Why are you masturbating so much? Like, what is it giving you? What are you escaping? What are you avoiding? You know, is it because you feel isolated and lonely? Is it because you're stressed and anxious?
The triggers.
Yeah, it's just what's it masking? Because it's generally masking something else. And it's getting to the deeper cause and root behind that. You know, maybe finding somebody that you can talk to about it, whether it's a friend or a male role model or somebody that you respect and feel safe with.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's finding a therapist and giving yourself that time and space to look into it deeper.
So if it's masking something, how can it be healthy?
I would say that it isn't healthy if it's masking something.
Okay.
You know, so again, I work with guys on this issue, and you know, some of them might watch porn up to like 5 hours a day. You know, they might be masturbating up to 7 to 10 times a day. And other guys that might be more to the asexual side of the spectrum, and masturbating just isn't even an issue for them. And, you know, and then they worry that there's something wrong with them, and it isn't. Everyone's just different. Your body's got its own rhythms, its own levels of hormones, the way that it wants to feel and express pleasure, the way that it wants to feel and express love and intimacy. You know, it's different person to person. But again, if it is masking something, can you reflect upon that and think about what it is, or do you need support in considering what that might be?
Yeah. As a counsellor and just running men retreats, what are other common issues that men come into you to sort them out, like porn addiction? What else?
Yeah, so in my counselling practice, I work a lot with addictions. You know, so generally it's drugs, alcohol, and porn. Then also work a lot with trauma and sex and sexuality as well. So sometimes it's a lack of intimacy with a partner, a lot of isolation and loneliness as well. And that might be that somebody's married or they do have a partner, but there's a lack of connection there. And it might simply be because they're working a 70-hour work week, they've got 2 or 3 kids at home, they need to be the provider, or they feel they need to be the provider with the only income, and just this lack of time for themselves. So what you were talking about before about your jiu-jitsu practice and what that gives you as a self-care practice, even if you don't define it as that, it's exactly what it is. You know, so how many times do we consider how we look after ourselves as men, and what does that self-care look like?
Yeah.
And it might just be something as simple as going to the gym, like you said, just going and thrashing out 45 minutes on the treadmill or on the bike, or, you know, chucking some weights around, and it gives us some form of release, of expression, even if we're not articulating it with words. But if you don't have those things, generally self-care is the first thing to be sacrificed when you're trying to keep your shit together. You know, you're trying to keep an income coming in, you're trying to get by with the state of society at the moment, you know, lack of community, everything that we saw with the Southport riots that happened after that. You know, there's so much going on at every level of society at the moment where people don't feel safe.
Where you touch on sort of self-care, and sort of
About
talking
to ask the same.
and talking about men that are listening to this, saying stressed, feeling anxious, things might not be good right now. You're working a lot. What are things that men can do to lean into self-care more of? Whether it's sort of going to the gym, but maybe it could be like just giving yourself more space, looking after yourself, like more sleep.
Do a fucking audit on your life.
Yeah.
Genuinely. Take a step back, take 10 minutes and just give an assessment of your life. Like, how much stress do you have? How full is that stress bucket that you have at the moment? Do you have any space in it? Or are you just firefighting in every area of your life at the moment? Just trying to keep it all together and thinking about everyone else? And look at what you can be doing for yourself. What's the first step that you can take to doing something for yourself? You know, that might be taking the dog for a walk in the morning. You know, it might just be going for a walk at the end of your working day and just getting out for like 15 minutes, just out in nature a little bit.
Yeah.
It might be that you start thinking about wider things such as doing breathwork or going to like an exercise class or reaching out to somebody, or maybe even joining like a men's group like Mentel. You know, going somewhere where you can just talk about all the shit that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis that nobody else in your life knows about and that you don't want to talk about with anyone that you know. So having that anonymity where you can go to a space where there's no judgment, there's no advice, there's no fear that somebody's going to share with other people what you've just said. There's that real level of confidentiality of being open, going to a space and being received by other men and being held with mature masculinity.
When you said audit yourself, what do you mean? Like, is there any specific building blocks that you need to look at? Like, that you said take 10 minutes, but what sort of questions you need to ask yourself and what you need to look at?
I suppose if you look like the wheel of life exercise, so you look at like the different quadrants, like say relationship, work, social engagement, finances, job. You know, look at those like 5 different areas, and then maybe rate them on a scale of like 1 to 10 on like how happy you are with those at the moment. Or maybe ask yourself certain questions around how much stress do you have in relation to each of those areas. You know, 1 being that you're in a great place and 10 being that you're in a very difficult place. And then consider that. And then consider like what you might be avoiding. And, you know, we talk about addictions, but what about if you're addicted to work? You get rewarded for that. You know, you get more money, you get more praise. You know, you can throw yourself into it. You might be avoiding your relationship at home. You might be avoiding a child at home who's acting up and behaving badly, and you're just staying at work more. You know, you're avoiding something by just throwing yourself into your work. You know, what does that look like? How is that harming your relationships even more and your family life even more?
Do you think overall men should be able to communicate better, not only with others but with themselves? I think that's a big issue that men face.
Yeah, I think it's having the permission to do so.
Yeah.
You know, the permission that it's okay, like you said, not to be okay. You know, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay not to have the answers. It's okay to be struggling. It's okay not to know what your next move is going to be. You know, and sometimes we have to sit with that. You know, I work with that in the counselling setting with clients. You know, I can see it when my clients get frustrated. And I said, you know, and I'll say this to them openly. I say, I bet you're thinking, why the fuck am I paying this guy by the hour and he's not giving me any fucking solutions?
Yeah.
And they burst out laughing. And I said, I'm frustrated as well for you. I said, but I can't give you the answers. The only thing I can do is ask you the questions to help you find your answers inside of you, because nobody's ever given you that before. No one's ever given you this time and the space to think, who are you? What do you want? What's important to you? What do you not give a shit about? And you need to just cut out of your life.
It's developing that sense of I, really.
Yeah.
A lot, I feel. And I still find that and question that, and knowing that it's also a developing thing. Like, I think as you go through life as well, a lot of the time it's the things that you come across, the adversity, the triumphs, everything that sort of manifests into more of who you are. It's also understanding and giving that space that it's okay to change and have permission to do that.
Yeah, 100%. David Bowie does a really great quote on that. You know, this journey through life is the realization that you're constantly, day by day, becoming the man that you're always meant to be. You know, this idea that we grow into who we are. You know, if I think about who I was as a teenager in school and the life that I have now, it's only in the last 5 years that I've felt masculine. That's fucking huge.
Yeah.
You know, I realized that I didn't have to integrate my feminine side. I needed to integrate my masculine side. That was crazy.
Yeah.
And when I realized that, developing this stronger sense of self, being able to say no, to have boundaries. I always cared for other people more than I cared for myself. I was constantly rescuing people. So similar to what you were saying about no more Mr. Nice Guy,
Yeah.
you know, this idea of do good, be good, help others, but not being taught self-care and boundaries around that. So just constantly over-giving to people, you know, and then that being detrimental to myself. So this idea of saying no, of understanding my boundaries, of putting my own health and well-being first, and it being incredible when I did. You know, it's empowering. It's a way of caring for yourself, which isn't arrogant and it's not selfish. It's having balance in your life, you know, unless you go to a place where you are becoming an arrogant prick, you know.
It's. I think doing that allows you to care for others more.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because, I resonate with that so because a lot of the time when you're giving so much of yourself and you're not giving yourself time, you can become resentful, like in a way, and to be able to give yourself the time and the sense of I and your own developing your own. So I think it only give you more to be in service of others and wanting to help people.
Yeah.
Like, I give myself that time. I can now give you that time.
Yeah.
I can imagine it being so hard for family or for people that have a really tight knit family because it's so easy to let yourself go for the people that you care about and love most.
Yeah.
But it's also knowing and developing that is just as important. Because even a lot of the time I feel I'm so quick and easy to give my time to people I care about.
Yeah.
And trying to really carve that out for yourself first, it can seem selfish at first, but it's the most selfless thing to do, really, because it's like that thing where it's you're going in an aeroplane and you see the car that's putting your own mask on before assisting others, right? And remembering that in a real life scenario is hard, but I think it's such a vital one for men to do. Because I think a lot of the time when men are so quick to try and jump towards a solution-based mindset, they'll only try and fix the problem once it's the problem.
Yeah.
But to go into more of a preventative state where it's like, before it's becoming an issue, how can I prevent that? Okay, well, maybe by doing that, it's just trying to ask myself the questions I just need to ask myself and give myself space to do that. But I think a lot of the time it gets pent up to that point where men just don't know what to do with themselves, and they're like, fuck, who am I?
Yeah.
You know, how do I deal with that? And I think it's just, I can imagine that's such a challenge that you face so much in these retreats is trying to get men to open up in a way that's allowing them to give them that space, really.
Yeah, you know what? As soon as we set the parameters and we contract with each other, and as facilitators, when we model that vulnerability, everyone just opens up. They really, really do. They see how the space is held, that no one's giving judgment, no one's trying to fix them, no one's trying to offer a solution. They're simply being present, they're being seen, they're being witnessed, and they're being respected. And that's it. There's something else that you said in there, and it's just gone out of my mind. Yeah, just this idea of how do you look after yourself first, and what does that look like? And I use that same analogy, you know, putting on the face mask on the aeroplane first. You know, it's okay to do that.
When sort of having those contracts with the men coming in the retreats, how do you come up with those values? Do you come up with that as a group?
Yeah, completely as a group.
Yeah.
We literally just ask a question: how do you want to be in relationship with each other this weekend? You know, we just say, call out a word, and then we drill down on what that word means. You know, we just keep talking until we run out of steam. And then we look at it, and then we acknowledge it. We ask the question if everyone's happy to agree to this and to hold each other accountable to it. And then we agree to it.
Are there any sort of words that in particularly stick throughout all the groups, or do they always differ?
No, you've probably got at least 10 or 12 that are always like coming up.
Really?
Yeah. Just like safety, confidentiality, respect of people's differences, autonomy, honesty. You know, we have like all the like heavy words, but then, you know, somebody will shout out like happiness or childishness, or not childishness, but childlike quality, which is just like curiosity. You know, it's joy. It's being able to recognize that even though we might be going through the shit, there's opportunities to recognize the happiness and the joy that we can experience. And I think as men, we forget that. I think we feel like we have to be serious all the time and just constantly be like the rock in any given situation, that we forget we can be a kid. You know, we can actually recognize when we can have a play or a mess about or a joke, and that's very different to banter. You know, it's not joking at somebody else's expense, but it's recognizing the fucking absurdity of life. You know, just how ridiculous it is at times. You know, the boundaries that we put on ourselves, or these concepts or ideas, and that we have the ability to let go of them sometimes.
Do you find that there's a specific age that men tend to let go of that play, that childlike? Does it tend to be when more responsibility is introduced and sort of starts to become serious? Because I think it's such an important thing to have, still remembering that kid.
Yeah, I do think it's different for every individual, again, depending on what their life journeys look like and the traumas and their experiences. But yeah, generally it's when more responsibility comes in. You know, it brings to mind a story that I got told the other day of this young kid in school who was seen as like the naughty kid, and a write-off essentially is this story that I was being told. This kid was just seen as a write-off, you know, constantly late for school, not wearing the uniform, not having the homework in on time, and for like the entire like school duration, like 3 or 4 years, the kid hadn't been really asked any questions about what was going on. It turned out that they had a parent who was a drug addict and an alcoholic. They had 2 younger siblings who were like primary school age, and they were the main carer for the siblings. They had to take them to school in the mornings, they had to get them fed, they did all the washing, they helped them do the homework. They never had any time for themselves. That's why they were always like showing up late to school. That's why their own clothes were dirty. That's why they didn't have time to do the homework. Who's asking about that kid? You know, we don't know what that person's happiness looks like. You know, they probably didn't have any, because they're being a parent at the age of 12 years old. You know, so when we talk about joy and happiness and what does that mean to other people, like you said, it's when that responsibility comes in. You know, and that could be at any stage in a person's life when they start getting more responsibility.
Yeah, totally agree. It's hard, I think, for when you think about happiness being such an expectation, I think that people need to have all the time, and it's not sustainable, achievable to have that every day, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
You
know, life isn't sunshine and rainbows, is it?
Yeah.
It just isn't. Like, we need to get comfortable with feeling sad, with feeling meh, you know, with feeling a bit shitty someday and not being able to articulate why. You know, I get it. I get times when I'll just feel sad for no reason, or I might feel a bit blue. It's not depressed, but just a bit blue, and I don't understand why. And I might feel like my emotions are a bit more closer to the surface, and I think, God, what's going on? And I'll try and sit with it and feel it out and give it time and space. And sometimes there just isn't an answer. And it's like, okay, accept it. Let go of it. Don't try and suppress it. Give it some time and space, but don't get lost in it either. You know, don't go to a place of despair or really worry and overthink it.
You mentioned earlier that being present is something that men could support each other. What would be our ways of reaching out to a friend and just asking them, helping them to open up?
Yeah, I can't remember who the hell it was. It was some influencer or some speaker on like men's health, and they articulated this in the right way. I think it might have been Simon Sinek. I think he said, have you got 8 minutes? And that was used as like a code word for friends if they were really struggling with something. And it isn't like, oh, do you want to have a catch up, or have you got time for a drink this weekend?
Yeah.
And people would not understand that there's a deeper question being asked there of like, I need you, or I need to talk about something, or I need help. So maybe coming up with something that you can articulate between your friends, and it's just like, dude, if I say this to you, this is a place of like, I need you. Or reaching out and being able to say, I'm struggling at the minute, mate. I don't know what to do, and I just need somebody to listen to me. You don't need to have the answers. You don't need to be able to offer me advice, but I just need to be able to talk to somebody.
For sure.
You know, I did it probably about a month ago. You know, I was struggling with some of my own stuff, and I reached out to 2 friends, and they were just there straight away.
Yeah.
You know, and both of them just like on calls and text messages for about an hour, as I was just struggling with something myself. And it was great. You know, they were just there, no questions asked, and they just like, and I literally said to them, I said, I don't need anything from you. I just literally need you to tell me the words, it's going to be okay. And as a therapist, I know it's going to be okay. I know that these moments don't last forever. And I was using every tool in my toolkit to understand what I was going through. I was giving myself time and space. I was feeling the emotions. I was trying to do grounding exercises. I was trying to do stabilization exercises. I wasn't suppressing what I was feeling. And I felt in such a state of panic that nothing I was doing was working. And all I needed was to connect with somebody else and to literally just be witnessed and held by someone else. Not even physically, but just remotely, of just having people talk to me. And I said, just tell me that it's going to be okay. And he said, it is, mate. It is going to be okay. You're going to be absolutely fine. You know, you've felt this in the past before, and it's going to be all right. And then I knew that, but I just needed to hear it from somebody else for it to land in my nervous system.
I think there's definitely a difference between those that sort of having friends at the pub that they go and see every weekend, to actually having friends that you can reach out to and go, hey, I need 8 minutes. And I think for me, I've tried to really cultivate more deeper, meaningful connections with people. So I think the older I get, I think prior I sort of had friends that were friends but weren't there for me in situations where I needed them. And I think it's quite important. Like, would you say it's quite important to sort of look at your network of people that are around you that are able to hold space for you?
And just recognize that, like, what capacity do your friendships have? And where might you need to cultivate some of those relationships to understand your friends on a deeper level and feel that they understand you on a deeper level as well. You know, just being authentically you, where you can actually say anything to a friend. You know, we might have different friends and friendship groups where we talk about different concepts or ideas with different people because we know that we'll hold it differently or be responded to differently. But where's somebody in your life that you can say absolutely anything to and not worry about what their response is going to be? And I know a lot of people that do not have that. So how do you start cultivating that? And it's trial and error. It's trying to develop those friendships. It's putting yourself in different situations, and it's fucking scary to do that. But it's trying to take that leap and try and develop that.
I think the problem is not with finding the right people, is willing to open up for other people like yourself. So some people, they just don't think that they should open up. And I feel that's because most of my friends, all of my friends that I have, they are more than happy to listen to me when I'm down or like when I'm feeling blue, and I'm happy to tell them because I know I'm going to be heard. Whereas if I wouldn't be aware that they are willing to listen, they're good people, but I'm just not aware of it, that I can talk to someone.
Do you think it comes from a place of the more you get to know and understand yourself, the more you start to cultivate deeper and meaningful relationships around you?
I think so, because you start changing the narrative. You start asking different questions. You start looking at your own life differently, and then start looking at your friendships and relationships differently, and seeing what's lacking. And then you might start changing the words that you use and the language, and then offering up different questions to try and build that deeper connection with people, and then seeing if they step into that or if they pull away from it. And if they pull away from it, call them out on it. Just like, oh, I just noticed that you really pulled away from that. What's going on there? You know, it's bringing that awareness into the moment and then giving them another opportunity.
Christian?
In terms of one more question. In terms of expectations, I'd say when people come into your retreats, or for men especially, who wants to get into therapy, what are the expectations, and maybe what would be the expectations, I'd say?
From them or from us, or?
From you, and both, I guess.
What I say to any person who wants to come into therapy is, the first thing I say is, have you shopped around? Have you looked at a bunch of different therapists, talked to a bunch of different people and got a feel for it? Because the therapeutic relationship is an incredibly personal one, and you need to find somebody that you can feel 100% yourself with. And that's a big ask when you're just starting therapy. So I say to my clients, it generally takes 2 to 3 sessions for us to get a feel for each other, and to feel if I'm somebody you can be safe with and explore things with. And therapy takes a long time to kind of engage with, and this unwrapping process of the therapeutic relationship. So trying out a couple of different therapists, or speaking to them at the very least, and getting that sense of who they are and how they're going to hold and respond to you. In relation to retreats, similarly, if I think that my retreat's not right for somebody, I'll have a consultation with them, find out what they're looking for, then I'll point them in the direction of other people's retreats, which might be a better fit for them. Because ultimately, whether it's therapy or whether it's the retreat stuff that we do, it's not about me. It's about who the client is, what their needs are, and how they're going to get those needs met. And I don't have any ego around that of recommending them to somebody else if I don't think that I'm the right person for them.
Yeah.
Christian, where people can find more about you?
Yeah, brilliant. So we're on Instagram, Men's Retreats UK, and then just really simple website as well, just like Ron Seal, mensretreatsuk.co.uk. We're pretty high on Google, just from it being good SEO.
Perfect. Thank you
so much.
Really appreciate for taking.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Time to do this podcast.
Yeah, cheers for having me, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cheers, man.
That's awesome.